I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the lights on in my bedroom. The bedroom I hadn't slept in for 12 years. 12 years abroad. 12 years dreaming of coming home. And yet the glow behind those curtains felt foreign, not warm, not welcoming. It felt like someone else's life was happening in my house, and I was only a stranger standing at the curb. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I stepped out of the taxi. My hands trembled a little. Age will do that to you. But the rest of me was steady. 72 years teach you to stand even when your knees argue otherwise. The night air smelled of pine and distant rain. I used to love that smell. Tonight, it made me uneasy. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked beside the porch. Big ones, new ones. Nothing like the battered sedan my son used to drive. The porch light was on. I never left it on when I lived here. Wasteful, I used to say. Wasteful and careless. But someone in this house had forgotten all the things I once kept sacred. I walked up the steps slowly, touching the handrail George had built 40 years ago. My husband's hands had shaped this wood. My son's childhood had run across these planks. And yet, nothing felt like mine as I stood there. The house whispered with noises, footsteps, faint laughter, the clicking of a cabinet door. Not my patterns, not my rhythms. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. Why knock on my own door? Still, I hesitated. 12 years away from home changes its shape in your mind. You think you're walking back into your old life, but lives don't freeze for you. People don't pause. Not even your own children. I opened the door. The hallway was bright, too bright, and the smell of expensive perfume drifted through the air. Not the modest rosewater I used to keep on my dresser. This one was sharp, synthetic, foreign to the house. I barely had time to register the changes when I heard it. A faint rustling, a soft thump, coming from downstairs. The basement. The basement, where Michael used to keep his fishing gear and old college boxes. He hated that place. Said it felt like a cave. Said it smelled like mold. But now, there was movement. I called out softly, "Michael?" The sound froze. Then footsteps, hesitant ones, moved toward the stairs. And then he appeared. My son. But not the man I remembered. His shoulders were thinner, his face hollowed by years of something I didn't yet understand. His hair, once thick and stubborn, was streaked with early gray. He was wearing an old sweatshirt that wasn't his size, sleeves too long, neckline stretched as if someone else had discarded it. "Mom?" His voice cracked. Not from emotion, from exhaustion. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, because those were the only words that came. He climbed halfway up the stairs but didn't come fully into the light, as if he wasn't allowed, as if something, or someone, kept him rooted there. You're home early," he said carefully, as though even that statement had consequences. Early? 12 years abroad, and he called it early. "I didn't want to warn you," I said softly. "I wanted to surprise you." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, not joy. "Does she know you're coming back?" he asked. "She?" I echoed quietly. He swallowed hard. "Heather." Before I could answer, a sharp female voice echoed from upstairs. "Michael, what are you doing down there? I told you." She stopped when she saw me. She was standing at the top of the stairs, wearing a silk robe. My silk robe. The pale blue one my husband had given me for our 40th anniversary. Her hair was curled, her lips painted a deep red, her eyes narrowed as she looked at me like I'd wandered into the wrong house. "Oh," she said, not smiling. "You're back. Back." As if I were a tenant whose lease had expired. Michael stood a step below me, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the floor. And in that moment, with my son in the basement and that woman in my robe, I understood. This was not the home I'd left, and I was not returning to my life. I was walking straight into the ruins of it. I followed my son down the narrow basement stairs, though every step felt like I was descending into a truth I wasn't prepared to face. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. A familiar sound, but twisted now, as if the house itself was warning me. Brace yourself, Agnes. Michael kept a few steps ahead of me, shoulders hunched, moving like a man ashamed of the place he was bringing his mother to. The air grew colder with every step. The basement had always been chilly, but this was different. Damp, stale, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something heavier, like long-settled resignation. At the bottom, he flicked on a lamp. The sight froze me. My son, the same boy who once complained he couldn't sleep without a proper pillow, who cried when a spider crawled into his shoe, was living on a thin mattress on the concrete floor with nothing but a single blanket folded neatly at the foot. No bed frame, no proper furniture, no warmth. Just a mattress and a folding chair beside it. On the chair sat a cracked coffee mug and a bottle of cheap water. My heart clenched painfully, but I kept my voice steady. At my age, grief and composure learn to coexist. Michael, why are you sleeping here? He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he sank onto the mattress, elbows on his knees, rubbing his palms together as if trying to warm them. It's temporary, he mumbled. Temporary. A word people use when they've given up on change. Michael, I said again, gently but firmly. He hesitated, then shrugged. A defeated, helpless gesture that didn't belong on the shoulders of a grown man. Heather, says I snore, he said. And she needs rest because of her migraines. The walls upstairs are thin, so it's easier if I sleep down here. A migraine. A flimsy excuse. I knew manipulation when I heard it. Age gives you that skill too. And how long, I asked softly, have you been temporarily sleeping down here? He let out a breath so quiet, I barely heard it. Almost a year. A year. My son, living in his own basement like a tenant hiding from the landlord. I looked around. His belongings were stacked in plastic bins against the wall, labeled in Heather's neat handwriting. Michael's old stuff. Tools. Unsorted. Even his life was boxed and stored, as though she were preparing to move him out piece by piece. I knelt beside him, slow, carefully, the way my joints allowed. Michael, I whispered, you know this isn't right. He rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, please don't start. But it wasn't anger in his voice. It was fear. What is she afraid of happening? I asked. If you sleep next to your own wife, in your own room, in your own house? He flinched, just the smallest movement, but enough for me to catch. He wasn't afraid of answering. He was afraid of being heard. She doesn't want me around too much, he finally whispered. She says I get in the way. I make her anxious. I disrupt her routine. She has rules. Rules. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. And you follow them. Another shrug. Another quiet surrender. It's easier that way, he said. When I don't, she gets upset. I placed my hand on his back. His shirt was thin, and he felt cold through it. Too cold. My son, who used to run hot even in winter, shivering like a man living in a shelter, instead of the home I built, the home I worked my bones thin to keep. Michael, I said quietly, look at me. He did, finally, and I saw everything in his eyes. Exhaustion, guilt, shame, and beneath it all, a deep, worn-out hope that someone, anyone, might pull him out of the quicksand he'd fallen into. You deserve better. He shook his head quickly. Mom, please. Please don't say that. Heather gets stressed when people criticize her. She thinks everyone attacks her. If she hears you— I didn't come here to attack her, I said gently. I came home. That's all. At that moment, footsteps sounded above us, sharp, impatient. Heather's voice floated down, cold as ice. Michael, I need you upstairs, now. He stood up immediately, too quickly, like a boy caught doing something he shouldn't. I reached for his hand, just briefly, grounding him. I'm here now, I whispered. We'll figure this out. He forced a weak smile. Just be careful with her, Mom. Careful. In my own house. He climbed the stairs and disappeared into the light above, leaving me in the dim basement with the truth settling around me like dust. My son wasn't living. He was enduring. And I knew, with the clarity of age and heartbreak, that whatever had happened in this house during my absence, it had carved something out of him, something I intended to return. Heather stood at the top of the stairs like a queen guarding her throne. Except queens usually carried some dignity. What she carried was entitlement wrapped in perfume that didn't suit this house. My house. She leaned on the railing, my silk robe tied a little too tightly around her waist, as if she wanted to show that she belonged to the space it represented. Her eyes, a cold gray that never warmed even when she smiled, landed on me with the sort of politeness that only thinly hides irritation. So, she said, each word crisp and rehearsed, you're really back. I stepped fully into the light, letting her see that I wasn't some wandering spirit returning to disturb her sleep. I was very much alive, tired from the long flight, older than when I'd left, but alive, and in no mood to be dismissed. Yes, I said simply. I'm home. Michael shifted beside her, not daring to touch the railing where her hand rested. He stood slightly behind her, a little bowed, as if hoping to avoid catching her attention. Heather's gaze flicked down my clothes, my shoes, my old travel coat. Too slow to be casual, too quick to be kind. We weren't expecting you until next week. That was the plan, I answered, but I changed it. Oh. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You should have called. I didn't think I needed permission to enter my own house. Michael's breath caught. Heather's smile froze, frozen enough to crack if she'd been made of anything other than ice. Well, she said after a beat, I suppose you must be tired. It's been— how long? 10 years? 12? Right, 12. She gave a bright, brittle laugh. So much has changed. I've been doing a lot of work around here. Work, a word she used like she'd rebuilt the place with her bare hands. Is that so? I asked. Oh, yes. We had to reorganize everything. The kitchen, the guest room, the closets. Things were very outdated. She nodded toward the corridor, where my hallway table used to stand. It was gone, replaced by a mirrored console with gold trim. Something gaudy. Something that didn't belong in this house of oak and worn carpet and memories. We wanted the house to feel modern, she said. Fresh. My fingers brushed the wall absent-mindedly, the way you touch the arm of an old friend who isn't quite themselves anymore. And Michael? I asked softly. Where does he fit in your reorganization? Heather's brows rose, offended. He's very comfortable. Comfortable. My son in the basement. Michael opened his mouth, maybe to defend her, maybe to defend himself, but Heather's hand shot out and rested lightly, but proprietorially, on his arm. Sweetheart, she said, in a tone dipped in honey but poured over nails. Go get the tea set for your mother, the one from the top cabinet. I'll talk with her. His eyes darted to mine. Worry. A silent apology. Then he obeyed. When he was out of sight, Heather's smile dropped, replaced by something blunt and honest. I hope, she said, lowering her voice. You aren't planning to interfere. I studied her carefully. The stiffness around her jaw, the restless fingers tightening the robe's belt, the slight tremble in her voice she thought she'd hidden. Interfere with what? I asked. With our arrangement, she said. Michael and I have a system. It works for us. He has his space. I have mine. We don't need you coming here after 12 years and undoing everything. Everything, I repeated quietly. That includes my son's dignity. Her nostrils flared. You don't know our marriage. No, I admitted, but I know my son. I know the look of a person who's been pushed into silence. Heather crossed her arms. You left him. A sentence she wielded like a knife. I left to work, I replied steadily. To give him a life I couldn't provide otherwise. I sent money every month. I paid the taxes. I kept the house afloat. I gave everything I had so he wouldn't drown. And now, she said coolly, he has me. I couldn't help the quiet exhale that escaped me. Yes, I can see what that's cost him. Before she could respond, Michael reappeared at the top of the stairs, holding a tray. I saw the familiar ceramic teapot, the one with the faded blue flowers, shaking in his hands. Not from weight, from nerves. Heather's expression instantly softened, polished into a smile so perfect it looked factory-made. There you are, she cooed. Sweetheart, careful with that. You know how clumsy you are. He flinched. She didn't notice, or pretended she didn't. Why don't we all sit downstairs? She said brightly. There's more space. Michael prefers it. I looked at him. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just stood there, waiting for someone else to choose his life for him. No, I said quietly. Heather blinked. I'll sit upstairs, I continued, in the living room of my house. A silence fell, sharp enough to cut. Heather's smile quivered. Michael stared at me like I'd just opened a window he'd forgotten existed. I slipped off my coat and hung it on the hook, the same hook it had hung on 12 years ago. I'm home, Michael, I said gently, and I'm not going anywhere. Michael carried the tray behind me like a child afraid to spill something on the carpet. Heather followed, footsteps sharp, controlled, each heel strike a reminder that she believed the house answered to her now. The living room looked both familiar and violated. My old sofa was still there, the one with the slightly frayed arm where Michael used to crawl up beside me to watch cartoons. But the pillows were replaced. Glittery, metallic things that had nothing to do with the soft, lived-in comfort I left behind. A giant scented candle burned on the coffee table, the kind of heavy, artificial scent that tries to hide the truth instead of soften it. I sat in my old spot, the corner of the sofa by the lamp, and watched Heather stiffen as if I'd taken her seat. She perched on the opposite armchair, back straight, legs crossed elegantly, like she was hosting a guest she didn't want. Michael placed the tray on the table and stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or hover. Heather patted the arm of her chair. Sit, sweetheart. Here. He obeyed, folding himself small beside her, a man learning to disappear. I poured my own tea. 72 years give you the right to do that without waiting for permission. For a moment, none of us spoke. Finally, I said softly, Michael, you look thin. Heather let out a brittle laugh. He's just stressed from work. He never eats breakfast. I tell him, but he won't listen. Michael lowered his eyes. The lie sat between us, obvious, like a cracked tile in the floor that everyone kept stepping over. You used to love breakfast, I said to him. Your father couldn't get you out of the house without 2 eggs and toast. Michael blinked, and for the briefest moment, his mouth twitched in something like a smile, a memory reclaiming a piece of him. Heather noticed. Her hand tightened on his arm. "Times change," she said quickly. "We don't need to drag up the past." I turned my cup slowly in my hands. The past is part of who we are. Ignoring it doesn't erase it. She gave me a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Well, maybe some parts should be erased. She didn't mean memories. She meant me. Michael's shoulders tensed. I leaned back, keeping my voice calm. Calm in a way only women my age learn. The kind of calm that's been tempered by grief and responsibility and too many nights spent alone. "I don't want to interfere," I said quietly. "I just want to understand. My son is sleeping in the basement. That isn't normal." Michael swallowed hard. Heather inhaled sharply. "It's healthier down there," she snapped. "Cooler. Better for his back." "I see," I murmured. "And you prefer your back supported by my bed, I assume?" A flush crept up her neck. "The mattress upstairs was old." "It wasn't," I said. "I replaced it 2 years before I left for Canada." She pressed her lips together, the way children do when caught. Michael sat very still. I lowered my voice, speaking to him. "You don't have to sleep there, you know. You're the man of this house." He twitched, the words landing somewhere deep inside him, a place he had stopped visiting. Heather cut in sharply. "He is the man of the house, and he chose the basement. We agreed, as a couple." Michael flinched. Heather didn't notice, or didn't care. I took a slow sip of tea. It tasted familiar, chamomile, but brewed weakly, as though no one here cared enough to let it steep. "Michael," I said softly, "did you choose it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. Barely, just an inch. But the truth was in that small movement. Heather's eyes snapped to him. "Michael!" He recoiled like she'd struck him. There it was. A crack. A tiny, trembling crack in the wall she'd built around him. I set my cup down. "I see." The silence that followed felt heavy. Heather broke it first, her voice too sweet to be sincere. "Agnes, maybe you're tired from the flight. We can continue this another day. It's getting late." Late. The sun hadn't even set. Michael looked at me, silently begging me not to push further. Not tonight. Not yet. And I understood. Not because I was afraid of Heather, but because he had lived at the bottom of that hierarchy for so long that pulling him out too fast might break him. So I nodded gently. "You're right. It has been a long day." Heather exhaled, relieved. But then I added, "I'll sleep in my room tonight." Her head snapped up. "You're... Oh, Agnes, we've been using that room. It's not really available." "I didn't ask whether it's available," I said quietly. "I said where I'll sleep." Michael's eyes widened, not in fear this time, but something close to hope. Heather stood abruptly. "I'll prepare the guest room." "No," I said. "I'll prepare my room." And I stood, slowly, painfully, but with a steadiness that unsettled her. Because Heather was beginning to realize something she had not expected. I might be old. I might be quiet. But I had come back. And I wasn't bending. Not this time. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing. Age makes you careful with steps, but that wasn't why I moved like that. I was bracing myself. You don't need to see a battlefield to know when you're walking into one. Sometimes you smell it first. The scent of perfume that never belonged to you. The echo of voices that never softened for you. The silence that holds no welcome. My bedroom door was closed. I stood before it, breathing in the faint trace of vanilla sandalwood. Nothing like the lavender sachets I once tucked into the drawers. My hand hovered over the doorknob a moment before I turned it. The room opened like a stranger's face. Familiar bones, unfamiliar features. My floral quilt was gone. The curtains I hand-sewed 40 years ago, replaced with heavy gray drapes that shut out the evening light. My rug, the one Michael bought me with his first real paycheck, was rolled and shoved into a corner like a forgotten box. But what stopped me wasn't any of that. It was the vanity table. My vanity table. George built it for our 20th anniversary, sanded the wood until it felt like silk beneath my fingers. I used to sit there and pin my hair before church, applying lipstick only on holidays. Now the surface was cluttered with Heather's things. Bottles of foundation, glittering skincare containers, hair oils, perfumes with names I couldn't pronounce. My drawer was open, as if she'd gone through it recently. And inside, my comb, my old brooch, the necklace Michael made in 2nd grade. All pushed aside to the back. Erased. I stepped deeper into the room, my shoes sinking slightly into the thick new carpet. I reached for the dresser. The top drawer slid open easily. Too easily. Inside, women's lingerie, lace, silk, expensive and cold. Not mine. Not from this house. Not from any life I ever lived. 2nd drawer. Sweaters I never touched, in colors I never wore. 3rd, more clothes, neatly arranged, organized like a boutique. Every piece of her life stored in the chest of drawers my husband bought me when Michael was a toddler. When I opened the closet door, the truth sank deeper. My dresses, the modest ones, the simple ones, were stuffed into plastic bags on the floor. Some hangers still had bits of thread from my sleeves, as if ripped off in haste. Heather's clothes filled every inch. Sequined dresses, designer labels, winter coats with fur collars, shoes stacked in neat towers. My closet, my room, my life, consumed by someone who treated it as a costume she tried on for size. For a moment, my knees went weak, not from age, from grief. Grief so sharp, it felt like a tooth inside the heart. I reached down and picked up one of my dresses, a simple blue cotton one. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I held it to my chest for a second, just long enough to remember the woman I had been in it. A woman with a husband, a son, a home. A home that loved her back. The floor creaked behind me. "Mom?" Michael's voice. He stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, eyes drawn to the bags of my things as though seeing them for the first time. I told her to leave your stuff," he said weakly. "I told her it was temporary." "And how long has it been temporary?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The room told the truth. "She said we didn't have space," he whispered. "Said your things made her anxious. Said it was better if she put everything away." "Put away," I echoed. "Michael, these aren't things. These are pieces of a life." He let out a breath that sounded like a confession. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to upset her. "And what about upsetting yourself?" I asked. "Your mother?" He flinched. I placed the dress on the bed, my bed, although the bedding was strange and glossy, reflecting the lamplight like cheap satin. "Michael," I said, quieter now, "why didn't you tell me?" He sat on the edge of the mattress, not his side, not mine, just somewhere in the middle, as though he no longer claimed any place as his own. "She said you wouldn't care," he whispered. "She said you left because you were done with us." Ah, so that was the story she'd fed him. I bent down slowly, reached into one of the bags, and pulled out an old framed photo. Michael, at age 10, holding a fish nearly the size of his arm, grinning like the world had no sharp edges. "I left to give you a chance," I said softly. "Not to be replaced." He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palm. "I know. I think I knew. Didn't want to fight anymore. Then let me fight, I said. Just for now. Until you remember how. He lifted his eyes, meeting mine. In them, I saw a boy who used to run barefoot through the yard. A man bent under someone else's rules. A son trying to survive a marriage by sacrificing himself, inch by inch. Heather's footsteps echoed down the hall. Sharp, intentional. I straightened, smoothing the dress on the bed. "Mom, please," Michael whispered. "Don't make her angry tonight." His fear made me colder than any basement. "I'll set boundaries," I said quietly. "Not battles." Heather appeared in the doorway, eyes darting over the room, the bags, the open drawers, my hands on the bedspread. Her smile was thin as paper. "Agnes," she said, voice tight. "I told you the guest room was ready." "I'm aware," I answered. "But I sleep here." Something flickered across her face. Annoyance. Disbelief. Maybe a spark of fear. But I didn't move. Not an inch. This was my room. And for the first time since stepping off the plane, I felt the ground of my own home under my feet again. Heather didn't raise her voice. That was the first thing I noticed. Women like her rarely shout. They wound softly, with small, measured cuts. She leaned against the doorframe of my bedroom, arms crossed, chin lifted in that way that says, "I own everything my eyes land on." "Agnes," she began, tone coated with polite poison, "you've had a very long trip. You must be exhausted. Why don't you let me settle you in the guest room? It's much more comfortable." She glanced deliberately at the bags with my clothes, as if reminding me of the demotion she'd assigned me without my consent. I didn't move. "This room is mine." She blinked once, a slow, irritated blink. "Well, technically, things have changed in the last few years. The house—" "I know what the house is," I interrupted softly. "I built my life inside these walls long before you ever stepped through that door." Michael looked between us like a trapped animal. His eyes kept darting to Heather, checking her expression, waiting for her signal. The way people conditioned by fear do. Heather stepped forward, her smile thinning. "Agnes, I don't think you understand how things work now. We have a system." "Michael and I have a system," I finished for her. "Yes, I've seen it. It involves my son living in a basement." Heather's jaw tightened. "He chose that." I turned to Michael. "Did you?" His throat bobbed. Silence hung for a moment, thick as wet cloth. Then he whispered, "It was easier, Mom." Heather spun toward him. "Michael!" But he stopped speaking. The tiny spark he'd let slip was immediately extinguished. Heather recovered quickly, brushing imaginary dust from the sleeve of my robe. "This conversation is getting us nowhere. I'm trying to be reasonable." "You moved my things out of my room," I said levelly. "You weren't here. You told my son I abandoned him." Her eyes flickered. "A hit. You put him in a basement. He snores. You took my dresser. It matched my style better. You claimed this room. Well, someone had to use it. And you say I'm the unreasonable one." Michael closed his eyes briefly, not from frustration, but from something that looked like shame. His hands trembled slightly, just like they did when he was a boy who broke something precious and didn't know how to fix it. "Mom," he murmured. I turned back to him. "Yes? That document, the one about the house." He swallowed hard. "There's something I should tell you." Heather stiffened, a single sharp inhale betraying her fear before she masked it with indignation. "Michael," she said quickly, "not now." But he continued, voice quiet, tired, defeated. "Mom, the house isn't in your name anymore." I felt the weight of the words settle in my bones, cold and heavy. "Explain." Michael rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he always made when he was hurting. Heather said it would help with taxes, that it was just paperwork, that we'd save money. She said it was smart. "Smart?" I repeated. He nodded miserably. I signed. She said you'd want me to, that you'd be proud I was taking responsibility. "Taking responsibility," I echoed again. Heather stepped between us, defensive. "Agnes, don't twist this. He agreed. He's an adult. We made a decision as a couple. You're not coming in after a decade to undo everything." I tilted my head slightly. "Heather, let me ask one thing. Whose name is on the deed now?" Her lips curved into a small, victorious smile. "Mine." Michael's shoulders collapsed, as though a stone had been placed on him. "Mom, I didn't know what I was doing. She said it wouldn't affect anything. She said—" "I know what she said," I murmured. Heather's voice sharpened. "Look, this is our home now. We've built a life here. You can stay, of course, for a little while. But you need to understand the order of things. This room is mine. Michael has his space. You'll have yours." "I see," I said quietly. "And I expect," she added, stepping closer, "that you won't cause trouble. We can all live peacefully as long as boundaries are respected." "Boundaries?" I repeated. "Yes, I believe in those." I walked to the center of the room and picked up the framed photo of 10-year-old Michael with the fish he'd caught. Heather watched, suspicious. "You want boundaries?" I asked. "Yes," she said tightly. "Good," I replied. "Then here's mine. I sleep in this room tonight. And every night. Because this is where I live." Her cheeks flushed. "You don't get to decide that." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not power, but fragility wrapped in arrogance. A woman terrified of losing control. "I already decided," I said softly. Heather's breath hitched. Her eyes flickered, anger, confusion, disbelief, before she spun toward the hallway. "Michael," she snapped, "come with me. Now." But he stayed rooted to the spot. Just 1 second. Just one breath. Just long enough to feel like he wasn't entirely hers. Heather noticed. And for the first time since I walked through my front door, I saw fear stain her perfect composure. I folded the blue dress over my arm, smoothing the fabric gently. "Good night," I said. Heather's lips parted, ready to argue, but nothing came out. Michael whispered, "Good night, Mom." And for the first time in years, the room felt like mine again. I woke before dawn, the way older women often do. Not because of insomnia, but because the house itself wakes you. Old wood remembers who lived in it longest. It shifts differently when you return. It listens. And that morning, the house felt uneasy. I slipped out of bed quietly. The satin sheets Heather had chosen made a faint, artificial rustle, nothing like the soft cotton I'd used for years. My feet met the cold floorboards, and I felt the familiar ache rise from my knees. Age has its tolls, but also its strength. You learn to move with pain the way others move with breath. The hallway was dim. Pale gray light crept through the heavy drapes Heather had installed. I pulled them back, firmly, letting the dawn spill into the room. Sunlight belongs to everyone, not just the one who thinks she owns the house. Downstairs, I heard pans clattering, voices, not quite arguing, but tense enough to ripple through the walls. I followed the sound to the kitchen. Heather stood at the counter in a silk robe again. Not mine this time, but one just as expensive, just as unnecessary. She was slicing fruit with rapid, irritated strokes. Michael sat at the table, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His shoulders were tight. He looked like a man bracing for impact. The moment Heather saw me, her knife froze in the air. "Good morning," I said softly, stepping fully into the kitchen. Michael straightened instantly. Something like relief flickered across his face, but he hid it quickly. "Morning, Mom," he murmured. Heather set the knife down with a clatter that was far too loud for such a small utensil. "Agnes," she said tightly, "we were just talking." "I can see that," I replied, moving toward the cabinets. "Is the kettle still in the same place?" "It's rearranged," she said. Of course it was. I opened the wrong cabinet twice before finding it. Heather gave a satisfied little smirk, as if winning a game I hadn't agreed to play. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. "Tea?" I asked Michael. "Yes, thank you," he said quickly before Heather could answer for him. She shot him a look sharp enough to draw blood. He lowered his gaze. The house grew quieter. Even the refrigerator seemed to hush itself. Finally, Heather spoke again. "Michael was just telling me he didn't sleep well." He didn't lift his head, just rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't because of Mom?" Heather gave a brittle laugh. "Of course it was. Everything was rearranged last night. You and I have a routine, Michael. When something disrupts it, your anxiety spikes." She said it like she was reading a diagnosis. "Maybe his anxiety spikes," I said calmly, "because he's exhausted from sleeping on concrete." Heather's shoulders stiffened. "You keep bringing that up." "Because it keeps mattering." She crossed her arms, a gesture I'd learned to read plainly by now. Defensive, threatened, cornered in the presence of someone she couldn't manipulate as easily. "Michael and I agreed on the sleeping arrangement," she said. I poured boiling water into 2 mugs, not 3. Michael's breath hitched. He noticed. So did she. Heather's smile hardened. "We don't appreciate judgment in this house." "In my house," I corrected gently. "And I'm not judging. I'm observing." "That's the same thing." "No. If it were, I'd be speaking much louder." Michael coughed, the sound brittle. He reached for the mug I set in front of him. His hands shook slightly. Heather saw it too, and somehow twisted it into evidence for her argument. "You see," she said, "he's unstable right now. He needs calm, Agnes, not pressure." I looked at my son, really looked, at the way his shoulders curved inward, the way he waited for her cues before he dared to speak. "Michael," I said softly, "what do you need?" His mouth opened, then closed. A moment of courage flickered, then died under Heather's stare. Heather answered for him. "He needs us to stay in our roles. You're a guest. We're the homeowners." I took a slow breath. "Do you know," I said quietly, "what my husband used to tell Michael when he was just a boy?" I didn't wait for her to answer. He'd say, "Son, a home is where you breathe without asking permission." The silence that followed was deep and raw. Michael's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something more painful: recognition. Heather stepped closer to him, placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. "We should finish our conversation upstairs," she said. "No," Michael whispered, barely audible. Her fingers tightened. "No," she repeated, incredulous. He swallowed hard but didn't take it back. Heather's face changed then, subtly but unmistakably. The smile cracked. The confidence slipped. For a heartbeat, I saw panic. Real panic. Not of losing Michael's affection, but of losing control. I set my hand gently on the table, steadying myself. My voice was quiet enough to force them to listen. "I'm not here to take your marriage," I said, "but I am here to reclaim my son, piece by piece if I have to." Heather's breath caught in her throat. Michael looked at me like a man who'd been underwater far too long and finally found air. And for the first time, I knew. She had no idea how to fight a woman who didn't yell. I left them in the kitchen that morning, Heather seething, Michael silent, and walked back upstairs with a steadiness that surprised even me. Sometimes, age gives you a spine you didn't know you had until someone tries to bend it. I changed into a clean blouse, brushed my hair, and put on the small pearl earrings George gave me for my 50th birthday. They weren't to impress anyone. They were for me. A reminder that once I had been loved without conditions. I slipped my old leather purse over my shoulder and headed toward the front door. As I reached for the handle, Heather's voice snapped through the hallway. "Where are you going?" I looked back at her, standing barefoot at the bottom of the stairs, robes cinched tight, eyes narrowed like I was escaping. "For a walk," I said. "And some errands." "You should have asked," she said. "Asked who?" I replied. "Myself?" Her jaw clenched. "We need to know who comes and goes. It's for safety." "Safety," I repeated softly. "Yes, I can see how dangerous I am." Michael appeared behind her, hair uncombed, face pale. "Mom, are you sure you're okay to go alone? You've been traveling for 20 hours. "I'm fine," I said. "I've walked farther in worse shoes." Heather stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you're planning to stir anything up, Agnes, let me warn you." I opened the door and stepped outside, cutting her off with the simplest act. Leaving. The air was crisp, cool for late spring, the sky washed in that early blue that belongs to small towns. I breathed deeply. Being out of that house felt like oxygen after smoke. I walked 3 blocks before stopping at a familiar spot, the old bench outside Morgan's grocery. When I was younger, I used to sit here while Michael ran inside for candy. He'd come bouncing out with a pack of gum and a guilty smile, knowing I'd pretend not to notice. Now I sat alone, watching the morning unfold, joggers passing by, a delivery truck unloading crates, a dog tugging a man twice its size. Normal life. Life without manipulation or hidden rules. But I hadn't come for nostalgia. I'd come to make a decision. The truth was simple. If Heather held the deed to the house, then legally, she held the power. Emotion meant nothing in court. Sentiment didn't win battles, and I wasn't going to let my son spend another year in a basement because I was too sentimental to act. I took out my phone, an old model, nothing fancy, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't dialed in years. Evan Calloway, attorney at law. He'd helped George and me draft our will. He knew our history, our property, our integrity. He was the kind of man who remembered who baked him pies after his divorce. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Agnes Holloway? I'll be damned. You're back." "Good morning, Evan." "You sound calm," he said, "which, given how long you've been gone, means something must be very wrong." I smiled, a tired smile, but real. "You've always been too observant." "What happened?" "Evan," I said quietly, "I need to talk to you about my house." There was a pause. "Your house? Did something happen to it?" "Yes," I said. "It's been reassigned." Silence. The kind that only comes when a lawyer smells something rotten. "Come to my office," he said. "Now, if you can." "I'm on my way." I walked the remaining 6 blocks slowly, partly because of my knees, partly because I needed the time to steady myself. By the time I reached his building, a small brick office with peeling paint, my heartbeat was calm again. Evan met me in the doorway. Gray hair now, thicker glasses, same steady eyes. He ushered me inside. "Sit. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about Michael in the basement, about Heather taking my bedroom, about the paperwork Michael had signed. I kept my voice level because anger clouds accuracy, and accuracy is what wins cases. Evan leaned back, fingers steepled. Do you know what he signed exactly? No. Did you sign anything before you left 12 years ago? No. Did you ever authorize a transfer? No. Then whoever told your son this benefits taxes is either incompetent or lying. Lying, I said. She's not incompetent. He nodded slowly. We'll need to access the deed. It'll show who owns the property, when the transfer happened, and under what authorization. And if the authorization is fraudulent. His eyes hardened. Then we undo it. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But Agnes, he added gently, prepare yourself. If she manipulated him into signing something, even if the transfer is illegal, this won't be simple. I didn't come back for simple, I said. I came back for my son. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled the way people smile when they see someone step back into their power. Good, he said. Then we start today. When I stepped out of the office an hour later, the sunlight felt warmer, lighter, as if something in the world had shifted by a fraction, just enough to breathe easier. I walked home slowly, expecting Heather to be waiting with another interrogation. But when I opened the door, I saw something else entirely. Michael stood in the hallway alone. Mom, he whispered, voice cracking. She's angry. She thinks you're planning something. I touched his cheek gently, the way I used to when he was small and certain I could fix everything. I am planning something, I said. I'm planning to give you your life back. His eyes filled, and for the first time, he didn't hide it. Michael stood in the hallway like a man waiting for a verdict. His shoulders were tight, his eyes red-rimmed, though he tried to hide it by blinking too often. I could tell he'd been holding himself together all morning, and seeing me walk through the door was all it took for the cracks to widen. I don't know what to do anymore, he whispered. The honesty in his voice struck deeper than I expected. After years of silence and submission, those 7 words were a collapse. The kind that happens only when someone feels for the first time in a long while that they are safe enough to fall. I stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. He flinched at first, not from me, but from habit. The way people flinch when touch usually means tension. Then he let out a trembling breath. Michael, I said quietly, tell me everything, not what she says. You. He swallowed hard. She's angry because you left the house this morning. She said it shows you don't respect her rules. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd in a way only cruelty can be. My rules, I said softly, were the ones this house was built on, not hers. He rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, I know things are wrong. I know that. But I don't want to ruin my marriage. I waited. I've learned that silence can pull the truth out of people faster than questions. Finally, he sat on the bottom stair, elbows on his knees, head bowed. She wasn't always like this, he said. At least I didn't think she was. When we first met, she was confident, charming. She made decisions quickly, handled things I didn't know how to handle. I thought she was helping. And when did helping become controlling? I asked gently. He gave a weak smile, the kind you give when you realize how naive you've been. Little by little. She'd say I forgot things, that I was disorganized, that she should handle the bills because it stressed me out. Then she said I wasn't good with people, so she made all the social plans. Then she said I got overwhelmed easily, so she should take care of the important documents. And you believed her? I said, not accusing, only acknowledging. He nodded. I thought I was being a good husband. I sat beside him, careful with my knees. Being a good husband doesn't mean becoming smaller. His breath hitched. I don't even know when I started sleeping downstairs, he whispered. She said it was temporary, but after a few nights I didn't argue anymore. It was easier. Easier for her, I corrected softly. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing himself through my eyes for the first time. A man who once had dreams, potential, a future, now living in a basement because someone convinced him he belonged there. I should have told you, he whispered. I should have said something. I'm here now, I said, and we'll address this together. He shook his head, fear rising again. She said if I choose you over her, she'll leave. And what do you want? I asked. His answer came without hesitation. Peace. You won't get peace by giving up pieces of yourself, I said. And you won't get it by letting someone rewrite your life. He pressed his palms to his eyes, fighting the emotion he'd buried for years. She'll be furious if she knows you talked to a lawyer. I touched his shoulder. Michael, I talked to a lawyer because you're my son. Because someone stole something that belongs to our family. Because silence is how people like Heather win. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His expression told me he understood, even if he was afraid to admit it out loud. Footsteps sounded upstairs. Sharp. Irritated. Heather's. Michael stiffened instantly, like a man caught in the wrong room at the wrong time. Mom, he whispered, voice tight. Please. Just be careful. I stood, smoothing the front of my blouse. I've lived too long to be careful with the wrong people. Heather's shadow appeared on the stairs above us. Michael. A word. Her tone wasn't a request. He rose, shoulders curling the way they always did around her. But before he followed her, he turned his head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. And in that small look, I saw it. A man beginning to wake up. Heather pulled Michael into the living room the moment she saw me heading toward the kitchen. She didn't slam the door behind them, but she closed it with a precision that meant the same thing. That careful, quiet kind of anger women like her prefer, the kind meant to leave marks without bruises. I stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled rise and fall of her voice. Michael's barely rose at all. It reminded me of a boy locked in the principal's office while someone else decided the punishment. Enough, I thought. Enough of closing doors. I turned away and headed to the hall closet where I kept the old metal box of important papers. The same box George and I had used for decades. I had tucked it behind winter blankets before leaving for Canada. Heather hadn't found it. Or maybe she simply hadn't cared to look for anything that wasn't hers. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the box. It wasn't fear. It was something sharper. Purpose. I carried it to the dining table, sat down carefully, and opened the lid. Inside lay the pieces of a life that once felt simple. The original deed, the tax records, the notary stamps, letters from the bank, the will George and I signed together. Paper is fragile, but it remembers the truth far better than people do. I sifted through the stacks slowly, methodically. Years teach you patience, and 12 years teach you exactly what people can do when you're not watching. I found what I needed, the notarized deed with my name on it, dated long before Heather ever met Michael. A line of George's handwriting along the margin. For Agnes, always. I traced the words with my thumb. His steadiness lived inside them. A shadow moved in the doorway. Michael. He stood there with his head bowed, hands shoved deep into his pockets like he was trying to disappear in his own skin. Is she calmer? I asked. He gave a short, humorless breath. No. I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. Instead, He leaned on the door frame the way exhausted people do when they're too tired to pretend. "Michael," I said gently, "come here." He walked to the table, eyes scanning the papers. His breath caught when he saw my name on the deed. "I didn't know you still had this," he whispered. "Your father and I weren't careless people," I said, "and we didn't leave room for fraud." He sank into the chair opposite me, shoulders folding inward. "She told me you'd transferred everything to me before you left. She said you trusted me to manage the house." "And that should have been your clue," I said softly. "You were never the one in control." "She was." He swallowed hard. "Mom, I didn't mean to sign anything. I thought—" "I know." His eyes glistened, but he blinked the tears back before they could fall. "I'm so sorry." I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. His fingers were cold, like he'd been wringing them for hours. "Son," I said, steady and quiet, "you've been surviving in a storm for years. You can't apologize for trying to keep your head above water." He let out a shaking breath. "She's scared," he whispered. "She knows something's happening. She says I'm changing since you came back." "You're waking up," I corrected. He rested his forehead on his clasped hands. "Mom, she told me that if I ever choose you over her, she'll leave." "And what do you want?" I asked again, gently yet firmly. He didn't raise his head, but his voice came low, honest. "I want my life back." I squeezed his hand. "Then let me do my part." He looked at the deed again. "You're really going to fight this?" "I'm not fighting her," I said. "I'm fighting for you. And for the truth." Just then, the doorway darkened again. Heather. She stood there with her arms crossed, eyes sharp, chin lifted in defiance. "Michael," she said, voice crisp, "we need to talk. Alone." He didn't rise. Her expression tightened, surprise flickering through the anger. It was the smallest shift, but I saw it. Fear threaded into her posture. "No," Michael said quietly. "I'm talking with my mother." The room went very still. Heather's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. She wasn't used to resistance, certainly not from him. Finally, she spoke. "Agnes is causing division. This isn't healthy." "What isn't healthy," I said evenly, "is controlling a man until he forgets he deserves warmth." Michael's eyes met mine for a moment, and something fragile yet real settled there. The first breath of freedom. Heather stepped back, stunned. I closed the metal box slowly, deliberately. "This house," I said, "is not yours to command." She opened her mouth, to argue, to shout, to lie, but no words came. For the first time since I arrived, Heather couldn't find her voice. Heather didn't retreat far. She moved only a few steps back into the hallway, hovering like a storm that refuses to fully leave the sky. I watched her through the open doorway as Michael sat rigid beside me, his breath shallow, hands clasped tightly between his knees. There are moments in a woman's life when she feels a shift, a small one, but irreversible. A moment when the balance of power tilts, even by a hair. That shift had happened. Heather felt it too. I saw it in the stiffness of her spine, the too still placement of her hands. She was calculating and frightened, not of me, not truly, of losing what she controlled. She stepped forward again, softer this time. "Michael," she said, voice smoothed into concern, "you're overwhelmed. You need space to think. Come upstairs with me." He didn't stand. A tremor ran through her expression, quickly disguised, but undeniable. I remained quiet. Sometimes silence is the strongest push. Heather turned her gaze on me, cold and steady. "Agnes, may I speak to you privately?" Michael tensed. "Mom doesn't need to." I touched his arm lightly. "It's all right." I rose, slow but deliberate, and stepped into the hallway. Heather shut the living room door behind us, not loudly, not softly, just firmly enough to signal control. We stood facing each other, two women from different worlds, different ages, different kinds of strength. But what she didn't understand was that age isn't weakness. Sometimes it's armor. Heather folded her arms. "What are you trying to do?" "Help my son," I said. "You're destroying him," she snapped. "You don't understand his anxiety. I protect him." "By burying him?" I asked. "By taking away his space, his voice, his bed?" She bristled. "You don't get it. Michael needs structure. He falls apart without it. He can't make decisions on his own." I let out a slow breath. "You trained him to believe that." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "I gave him stability when you left." "I left to work," I said, "to support this home." "Don't pretend you're a saint," she shot back. "Michael told me. You were gone for years. You missed birthdays, holidays." "And I sent money every month," I said evenly. "Paid the mortgage, paid the taxes. While you—" I let the sentence hang, unfinished but clear. Heather's cheeks reddened. "You're trying to turn him against me." "I'm showing him the truth." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Fine. Let's talk truth. You say this house is yours, but legally, you stole it," I said quietly. "With manipulation. With lies." Her mouth twisted. "He signed voluntarily. He didn't understand. He's not stupid." "No," I said, "but he was vulnerable, and you used that." For a moment, she faltered. Her eyes flickered, just once, like a crack in polished glass, and I saw something unexpected. Panic. Real panic. Because deep down, her power depended on him being too tired to think. I stepped closer. "Heather, listen carefully. I'm not here to scream at you. I'm not here to throw you out. I'm here to set things right." "You can't undo the deed," she said quickly. "It's legal, it's binding. We'll let a lawyer decide that." The words struck her like a slap. "A lawyer?" she whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "A very good one." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Michael won't go along with that." "Michael," I said, "wants his life back." And that was when she broke composure entirely. "You don't get to come back after a decade and take him away from me," she snapped, voice rising at last. "I built everything here. I kept this house running. I kept him functioning. You're just—" She stopped herself. Too late. "Just what?" I asked quietly. She tried to recover, but the truth had already slipped. "Just, you don't know how delicate he is." "He's not delicate," I said. "He's tired." We stood like that for a moment, her breathing fast, mine steady. Then I stepped past her, returning to the living room door. My hand rested on the knob. "Heather," I said, without turning, "there's still time to choose kindness." She didn't answer, because she knew kindness had never been her weapon of choice. I opened the door. Michael looked up instantly, eyes searching mine, waiting. "Heather wants to talk," I said gently. He stood slowly, but then he stopped beside me instead of walking to her. Just stopped. Heather stared at him, stunned. "Michael," she said, voice cracking, "come here." He didn't move. His silence was louder than shouting, and Heather understood, finally. He was no longer standing in her shadow. Heather stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Michael as if the ground had shifted under her feet. She had expected obedience, the quick, habitual kind he'd given her for years. Instead, she found stillness, his refusal. And nothing unsettles a controlling person more than sudden quiet. "Michael," she said again, this time softer, coaxing. "Sweetheart, don't make this harder. Come upstairs. Let's talk privately. He didn't step toward her. He didn't even turn his body. He simply lifted his eyes from the floor and looked at her, the way a man looks when something finally breaks inside. Not in defeat, but in awakening. "I'm talking with my mother," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't waver either. Heather's face twitched. "I'm not asking," she said sharply. "I'm telling you." He flinched. Old habits don't vanish overnight, but he didn't move. I watched the moment carefully. My son looked like a man standing barefoot on glass, frightened to move, frightened to stay, frightened of the consequences either way. But he was standing. That mattered more than anything. Heather's eyes darted between us, desperate for a crack she could slip back into. "Michael," she tried again. "She's confusing you. You know how overwhelmed you get. You know how easily people manipulate you." "Enough," I said quietly. She turned on me. "This is between me and my husband." "Everything in this house is between all three of us," I replied. Michael's breath shuddered, not in fear, but in relief. Someone else had finally said what he couldn't. Heather stepped closer to him. "Come. Now." He shook his head. A small movement, but final. Her mouth fell open. "What has she done to you?" I answered before he could. I reminded him he's allowed to exist. Heather's eyes glittered with a kind of fury I'd seen only a few times in my life. The fury of someone losing control piece by piece and unable to stop it. She lowered her voice to a whisper, meant only for him. "If you don't come with me right now, Michael, I'll leave." He stiffened. His fingers curled. "Do you hear me?" she pressed. "I'll pack a bag and walk out that door." He stared at the floor, trembling. Years of manipulation wrapped themselves around his spine, tightening, pulling. I saw the panic in his eyes. The same panic he must have felt every time she threatened to withdraw her approval, affection, stability. For men like Michael, emotional abandonment can feel more terrifying than physical danger. So I stepped closer and touched his arm, lightly. "Michael," I said softly, "you don't have to choose between us. You only have to choose yourself." He closed his eyes, his breath uneven. Heather saw it, saw him leaning toward liberation, and she snapped. "Fine," she spat. "Then stay here with her. Sit here like a child while she destroys everything you and I built." "Built?" I repeated quietly. "You mean the basement?" She shot me a venomous look, then pivoted toward the stairs. "I'm done. I'm done trying to help someone who won't help himself." She stormed up half the staircase before turning back. "If I go, I'm not coming back." Michael didn't move. Her footsteps thundered down the hall, into the bedroom. My bedroom, where drawers opened, hangers scraped, bags unzipped. The noise was frantic, uneven, almost desperate. Michael sank onto the couch, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen." "It needed to happen," I said gently. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She'll leave." "And you'll still be standing," I said. "But," he whispered, voice cracking, "what if she's right? What if I can't do anything alone?" I moved closer to him. "Michael, you've been surviving alone for a long time. That basement was solitude, not partnership." He let out a trembling breath, eyes fixed on the floor. "Maybe I'm broken." "No," I said, steady but soft. "You're tired, and people mistake exhaustion for weakness." We sat in silence, the kind that fills a room with truth instead of fear. Upstairs, a suitcase zipper screeched shut. Then footsteps. Then Heather appeared at the top of the stairs, dragging a small rolling bag behind her. She'd dressed herself in haste. hair messy, makeup smudged, but still wearing that brittle pride like armor. "You'll regret this," she said to Michael. Maybe once he would have believed her. Now he only looked at her, quietly, steadily, without shrinking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It wasn't an apology for his choice. It was an apology for so many years of being afraid. Heather's face twisted. She yanked the suitcase and marched out the door, slamming it behind her. The echo rolled through the house like a long-held breath, finally released. Michael stayed frozen for a moment, listening to the silence. Then he collapsed into the couch, burying his face in his hands. I sat beside him. "I didn't want her to hate me," he said, voice muffled. "She doesn't hate you," I replied. "She hates losing the version of you she controlled." He nodded slowly, understanding, even if it hurt. And in the quiet that followed, the house changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to feel like it might become a home again. The house felt strangely hollow after Heather's departure. Not peaceful yet. Emptiness isn't peace. But the air no longer held its sharpness. It was as if someone had opened all the windows at once, letting stale control leak out. Michael sat quietly for a long time, breathing like a man relearning how lungs work. I didn't rush him. I'd learned long ago that brokenness doesn't heal under pressure. It heals in small, trembling breaths. Finally, he whispered, "She'll come back." "Perhaps," I said softly. "But the version of you she knew won't be waiting." He looked at me, then really looked, and something steadier settled in his eyes. Not confidence. Not yet. But a beginning. I stood and went to the dining table, retrieving the metal box. The deed lay on top, the paper slightly yellowed, but the ink still bold. I set it down in front of him. "Michael," I said, "we need to talk about the legal side." He winced. "I know. You signed something you didn't understand. That's not a crime. But what she did may be." He closed his eyes. "Mom, I trusted her." "That's not a flaw," I said. "It becomes one only when someone turns your trust into a weapon." He rubbed his palms together slowly, staring at the documents. "Can we really undo it?" "Yes," I said. "Evan will file the challenge this week. He believes the transfer isn't valid. Your signature was obtained under manipulation, and mine was never given. Legally, the house wasn't hers to claim." He nodded, a shaky exhale leaving his chest. "I don't want to fight." "I know," I said gently. "But sometimes you have to stand so others can't keep pushing." He swallowed hard. "Will she get in trouble?" "Perhaps," I answered honestly. "But that's between her and the law. Our job is to reclaim what was taken." He lowered his head. "I feel ashamed." I reached over and lifted his chin slightly, not like a mother correcting a child, but like a woman offering another a place to breathe. "Shame belongs to the person who lies," I said, "not the one who survived it." A long silence followed, filled only by the tick of the clock on the wall, the same one George used to tap when it ran slow, as if reminding time to behave. Finally, Michael whispered, "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we take back the house. Legally. Quietly. And then?" "And then," I continued, "you move upstairs, into the light, into your own life." His eyes softened, and for the first time since I'd returned, he gave me a small, real smile, the one he used to have before the world chipped away at him. We spent the afternoon sorting paperwork. He fetched old mail from drawers. I organized documents into neat piles. Together, we pieced back the history that Heather had tried to rewrite. Occasionally, he paused, rubbing his forehead, overwhelmed. Each time I placed a hand on his shoulder until his breathing steadied. By evening, the box was full again, not with chaos, but with order, with truth. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I touched the deed gently. "Don't thank me," I said. "Just come back upstairs tonight." He nodded, and in that moment, the house, my house, exhaled. Walls soften when the people inside them begin to heal. The legal battle would come next. But for the first time, it felt winnable. Because Michael was no longer standing in the basement. He was standing with me. I woke the next morning before Michael did. For the first time since returning home, the house felt still in a way that wasn't tense. No footsteps pacing above. No clipped commands barked down the stairs. No perfume clinging to the air like plastic. Just quiet. I dressed slowly, letting the morning light settle across the room. My room. Soft and familiar again after I'd reopened the curtains. I took my time smoothing the bedspread, touching the wooden dresser, letting my fingers rest on the small carvings George left with his pocket knife decades ago. It felt like reclaiming something I'd once believed lost. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard Michael moving around in the kitchen. The sounds were hesitant. 2 mugs clinking, a drawer opening cautiously, water running. Not the smooth, controlled motions Heather used to demand, but the kind of uncertain effort that comes when a man hasn't made a choice for himself in a long time. I walked in quietly. He stood by the stove, shoulders hunched slightly, concentration etched into his brow as he attempted to scramble eggs. He had burned the first batch. The frying pan on the counter still held the evidence, but he was working on the second. Trying again. That alone was something worth witnessing. He turned when he heard me. "Oh, Mom, I wanted to make breakfast." His smile was small, uncertain, but real. "For us." I touched his arm lightly. "It smells wonderful." He glanced at the pan, doubtful. "It might be edible." "That's more than enough," I said. We ate together at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to spill cereal as a boy, where George used to read the paper in the mornings, where I once sat stitching hems while the world outside our windows felt kind and normal. Michael ate slowly, as if tasting food for the first time in months. He wasn't twitching, wasn't bracing, wasn't waiting for criticism. He was simply eating. When we finished, he looked down at his hands. "Mom, I don't know how to live upstairs again." I nodded. "You don't have to know everything today. Healing isn't an event. It's a rhythm." He let out a breath that seemed to unclench something inside him. "I feel guilty." "Why?" "For letting it get this far." I reached across the table, folding my fingers around his. "Michael, abuse grows in silence. And silence grows when love feels like obligation. You didn't fail. You endured." His eyes glistened. He didn't cry, but he didn't hide the emotion either. That, too, was a change. We spent the rest of the morning cleaning the basement. Not because I asked him to, but because he said quietly, "Mom, I don't want to sleep down here ever again." Together, we sorted through the piles, the bins, the damp cardboard boxes. He paused often, overwhelmed by the reminder of how small his world had become. Each time, I waited, gave him space, let him choose the pace. By early afternoon, the basement was empty except for a few old tools and the echoes of years he would not return to. When we carried the mattress up the stairs, Michael stopped on the landing, gripping the railing. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever leave this place." "You did," I replied. "Not because I pulled you, because you stood." He shook his head slightly, voice breaking. "I stood because you came home." I brushed his cheek gently. "Then I came home just in time." Later, while he showered, I walked through the house room by room. The living room, now quiet. The kitchen, warm again. The hallway, free of watching eyes. Each door felt different now, like the house was slowly shedding the invisible tension that had wrapped itself around every surface. When I reached the front window, I saw something unexpected. Heather's car, parked across the street. Not moving. Not leaving. She sat behind the wheel, staring at the house. Watching. A woman who had lost hold of something she believed was hers. I didn't move closer. I didn't wave. I didn't call Michael. I simply stood, letting her see me if she chose to look. After a minute, she started the engine. The car rolled away slowly, turning the corner without hurrying, without rush. A goodbye that wasn't a goodbye. A retreat that wasn't surrender. Just distance. I watched until the street was empty again. Then I closed the curtain, not in fear, but in closure. Behind me, Michael stepped into the hallway, hair damp, wearing clean clothes. "Mom?" he asked gently. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Everything is finally beginning to be okay." And in that quiet, in that fragile new stillness, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not victory, but home. The house settled into its new quiet over the next few days. A quiet that wasn't tense or watchful or sharp. It was the kind of quiet a home makes when it finally exhales. When the walls no longer brace for slammed doors. When footsteps soften because no one is afraid of being heard. Michael moved into the guest room first, not because he wanted distance, but because the idea of reclaiming his marriage bed felt too heavy. Too tied to years he didn't yet know how to unpack. I didn't rush him. I knew better than anyone that healing is a slow, uneven climb. He carried his clothes upstairs, one folded stack at a time. He wiped down shelves, opened windows, let the stale air drift away. And slowly, very slowly, his posture shifted, his shoulders lifted, his movement steadied. He began to speak more than a few sentences at a time. On the third night, he knocked on my bedroom door softly. "Mom," he said, "can we cook dinner together tomorrow, like we used to?" It was such a simple request. But simple things become sacred when you've lived too long without them. "Of course," I told him. "Tomorrow." And we did. We chopped vegetables side by side, arguing gently about seasoning, laughing when he spilled salt across the counter. Nothing dramatic, nothing profound. Just a mother and son standing in a kitchen, and breath coming easier between them. A week later, Evan called to say the paperwork had moved forward. The deed transfer was being challenged, the court dates would be set soon, and everything looked clean, in his words, meaning the law was on our side. When I told Michael, he didn't cheer or sigh with relief. He simply closed his eyes and nodded, as if accepting a truth he'd been too afraid to believe. "I don't hate her," he said quietly that evening, while washing dishes at the sink. "You were never meant to," I replied. "Not hating someone doesn't mean you must lose yourself to them." He dried his hands slowly. "I'm scared I won't know how to be on my own." "You've been on your own for years, Michael," I said. "You just didn't have the freedom to realize it." He looked at me with those tired, earnest eyes I'd known since he was small. "Thank you for coming back, Mom." I touched his cheek, a fleeting, gentle gesture. "I came back because I wasn't done being your mother." He smiled then, a real smile, soft and young and a little bit broken, but his. In the following days, Heather stayed away. No calls, no messages, no sudden appearances at the door. I didn't know whether she'd return to fight, or to apologize, or simply to reclaim her things. But that was her road to walk, not ours. Freedom, sometimes looks like distance. One morning, I found Michael sitting on the bench outside, drinking coffee and looking at the sunrise. He used to watch the sunrise only from the basement window, a small slice of sky barely big enough for light. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I just woke up early. And it felt good. To sit here, to breathe." I eased myself down beside him. The air was cool, filled with the promise of a quiet day, the kind where nothing hurts too loudly. He took a sip, then said, "Mom, when this is all settled, I think I want to paint the living room, maybe start fixing things again, make the house feel like ours." Ours. Not hers. Not mine alone. Ours. "That sounds perfect," I said. We sat there until the sun rose fully, touching the house with gold and warmth. And for the first time in years, Michael didn't look small. He didn't look lost. He looked like a man returning to himself. As for me, I didn't feel strong or triumphant or vengeful. I felt steady. I felt present. I felt like a woman who had finally returned not just to her house, but to her life. Before we went inside, I touched his arm gently. "You know," I said, "sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reclaim what was always yours." He nodded. "I'm learning." I smiled at him, at the morning, at the simple promise of quiet safety. And as I stepped back through my own front door, I thought, perhaps this is all any of us are trying to do, come home in the truest sense of the word. If you're reading this, and you've ever felt small in your own life, or unheard, or pushed into a corner that was never meant for you, step back into your light, even slowly, even trembling. Just start. Some returns begin with a single quiet choice, and this one was mine.